I'm Father Pullman.
And I'm Father Schumacher. And
we are the Associates.
Welcome back to another episode of Ask the Associates. Father, Lent's coming, and this question I think helps us a lot in getting ready for Lent. Once one has acquired a certain virtue, how can that virtue be increased or strengthened?
All right. Well, all right. So I have some semblance of a virtue, but I clearly see that I can grow in it. Well, there's good news about the growth in virtues. So one, simply by practice. So we want to look at the virtues as kind of the spiritual muscles of the soul. So the more I work them out, the stronger I'm going to get. And I also want to give an encouragement to people who might struggle. Well, we're all going to struggle with growth in any of the virtues. But don't be discouraged if you feel weak, simply because if we're in a workout, if we're growing in virtue, then it's when I feel weakest that I am, as long as I'm resisting, that's when I'm actually growing the strongest in the virtue. So, we can even look at fasting and growing in it as a virtue, for instance. So we're going to have prayer, fasting, and alms given, especially in the season of Lent. We can keep doing it. Then what's another thing that people do at a workout? Increase the weight. So if you perhaps have introduced fasting from the time you wake until noon, for instance, as an introductory phase, well, then maybe try and go until dinner, abstaining from food, or a very simple lunch, like just bread and water. But then there's also, this is something that's actually different from the vices. So the vices, a person who is just a habitual sinner in a lot of different areas, the vices don't strengthen each other, but the virtues do. So any virtue that I grow in is going to help me be more virtuous in all the other virtues.
I've heard the example of the virtues grow like the fingers on a hand. It would be really weird if one of our fingers grew because we really worked that finger out, and the other ones didn't grow. So the virtues grow together.
Yes. So in this regard, there's also certain things that are good on a more specific level as well. The baseline virtue is humility. So you'll hear the saints talk about humility not because it's the most important, but it's the most fundamental. If you are not humble to some degree, you cannot grow in virtue because you're not open to it. But then there's the crown of the virtues, which unifies and binds the rest together. And that's the one virtue that I'm aware of, that there is no extreme. And that itself is charity, or that divine love. You can't love too much. There can be expressions within the virtues that is to one extreme or another. And finally, this is why it's good, I think, to go to frequent confession, especially with a priest who has studied the virtues and the moral life, because even within the virtues which all strengthen the soul, there are particular virtues that are connected even within that. So, concrete example. If someone struggles with alcoholism, for an example, or just drinking in general, I want to be more sober and I want to grow in that. Well, that's actually under the cardinal virtue of temperance. And so if I'm more temperate with my eating and just consumption of non-alcoholic drinks, that will connect to sobriety, the virtue of sobriety. So these things are all connected in a way that will help us excel and grow in virtue.
Yeah. One of the really neat things about the virtues is that they are goods, that they're basic kind of good things. One of the definitions of virtue that St. Thomas Aquinas proposes, he's drawing from the Aristotelian tradition here. He says, a virtue is that which no man puts to evil use, right? Which is kind of a weird way of defining virtue. It's kind of a negative formulation of it. But he's pointing out something very, very interesting about virtues. You can't use temperance for badness. Temperance itself is a good thing that produces good action, which means that we can always seek more of them, and even we can ask them from God and always be confident that he wants to give them to us, right? So lots of natural goods are not necessarily good for us in this particular circumstance, right? So you might ask God for health, or you might ask God for kind of financial stability, or you might ask God for whatever, right? And they're good things, right? But they might not be good for you in this particular circumstance, which God knows by his all-knowing, which is why perhaps he doesn't give them to you. But there's no way in which more temperance or more chastity or more charity is bad for you or wouldn't be good for you in this circumstance. So he's always willing to give you increase in virtue. Now, practically, how do you acquire that? Father gave us some examples. We acquire virtue just basically by doing the action that's involved in the virtue, right? Your example about drinking, right? If you, on a particular occasion, choose not to drink or choose to drink in a sober fashion, right, in accord with right reason, you gain the virtue of sobriety. You either come toward it if you don't already have it, or if you have it, you strengthen it, which is great. And that's why we put up here, verso l'alto. This is a phrase famously of Pier Giorgio Frassati, one of the blesseds of the church of the last century. He was a young man, he was an athletic man, dynamic man who led a lot of other people to sanctity, and he loved going mountain climbing. So this phrase means to the top. And in sanctity, which is what the virtues are, in sanctity there is no top. There's no limit. God is the top, and he is infinite. In heaven, in fact, there are going to be degrees of sanctity. Some saints are better than other saints. And that doesn't mean that the lower saints are bad. It just means that there are people who have even more virtue than even these saints did, which is wonderful. Of course, we know that the greatest of all the saints is Our Lady, the Mother of God, who excels everyone in every virtue. So that should give you good confidence that no matter where you are, you can always go higher. And that's what God wants for us. That's what we mean by holiness. That's what we mean by the moral life. It's not so much about following rules. It's about gaining this sanctity of life inside of us.
Yes. And so, as we're approaching Lent, there are those general things that, again, prayer, fasting, and almsgiving, that we want to grow in prayer. We want to grow in our ability to fast. And our almsgiving is basically the exercise of charity. So to grow in charity. Now, one of the things for the particular growth in a particular virtue, what we want is to produce what's called an efficacious desire. So what this means is I have a desire that I bring to actual fulfillment. And so this gets down to the practicality of I'm going to decide not only to do something, but how I'm going to get there. So if I plan a trip, vacation, for instance, and I don't choose dates, I don't buy plane tickets or rent a car or some transportation, I'm not going to get there. And so, with this Lent, we are on pilgrimage with Christ. And we need to find out what road we're going to take, how we're going to take it, how many times a day or a week, and so that we know before the frailty of human nature takes its sway in the moment, and I don't feel like doing it. Right.
Yeah. One thing that can be helpful in this, because there are hundreds of different virtues, if you delineate them out all the way down, it can be a little overwhelming. So find the one or two that you want to work on, either because you've noticed I've been struggling against this, or you think that it will really help you in your spiritual life. And okay, so the virtue I want is this, and these are the circumstances in which I will have an opportunity to exercise it. And here's what I'm going to do in those circumstances. And then you've broken the problem down into manageable parts, just like any other, good program of self-improvement, right? This isn't self-improvement, but we do have to take, the ordinary courses to do it well. And if you do that, and if you do that over the course of several weeks, you'll start to notice, okay, this is becoming easier. Just like a workout regimen, the first day that you run 3 miles, you're going to be worn out at the end of it. But after a couple weeks of doing it every day, 3 miles isn't hard.
I'll take your word for it. To the top.
Click the logo right there to subscribe.
Thanks for watching. New episodes come out every Wednesday.